Hi everybody, welcome to Active Self-Protection Extra. It is Friday and that means another John's Briefs. And today I'm going to take over a little bit because I have some questions about something that I don't have a depth of experience in and I would like to ask you about them.
So let's talk today about using jiu-jitsu and when our martial arts goes from the use of force to deadly force.
Now more than ever, you need trusted coverage to help you win the fight after the fight. The company I trust and recommend is Firearms Legal Protection. They offer discounts on all their plans at the link in the description. I recommend the premium plan.
All right, so you have a significant martial arts background.
I got the kung fu's, man.
Not at all what it is.
For anybody who doesn't know, if you're not paying attention, I have a second-degree black belt in a derivative of Kempo known as Umas. I'm a white belt in jiu-jitsu. I've been studying jiu-jitsu about 2 years now, and enjoying that. Life gets in the way. You know, in the Rona, we lost some time, but yeah. So martial arts is a big deal to me. Been for quite a long time.
So I remember the first time I saw this come into play, way before I was a self-defender watching, I think the movie was Con Air, where he got into trouble because, you know, he had all this training that made him a deadly threat, far beyond what a regular person would be. So if you're someone that practices martial arts, at what point does that become a consideration to you? At what point does your jiu-jitsu become a deadly threat to someone else?
So, I mean, first thing I always say is people get this idea that, well, like when you're a black belt, you have to register your hands as a deadly weapon.
Master Ken does.
I mean, Master Ken does. But literally, I think Guam has a law about that.
Oh, really?
I think that's literally the only one I've ever been able to see, which is ridiculous, right?
Right.
So no, having a martial arts background from a legal perspective doesn't mean like, oh, you're suddenly insta-deadly. Because there's a lot of martial arts. I mean, I know friends who their martial art is really based on being gentle to people. That's, for instance, my friends who study Aikido. Aikido is like the way of gentleness. It's the way of not hurting somebody. And so, you know, the idea is, and that's when people say jiu-jitsu, right? So jiu-jitsu is kind of the fighting art of gentleness, or I actually would say the art of pliability that's very flexible to you. So Kenpo, if you want to know, Chinese for the closed fist. And so, you know, you get this idea that it suddenly makes you deadly. Well, no, but I think it does raise your standard a little bit.
Okay.
Because if you are somebody who's very good with your hands, well, then you would be expected to handle more than somebody who doesn't if you're in a reasonable situation. So with 15 years of martial arts study, and I draw a gun and shoot somebody and it's sketchy, right? Is the jury going to hold me accountable for my knowledge? Of course they are. I mean, again, now I think the opposite's not true. When somebody goes, well, wait a minute, that guy who attacked me with his hands was a trained martial artist. Well, did you know that? If you knew that, if you're like, dude, he had his big martial arts medal around his neck and he was
walking out of the dojo.
Right, he's walking out of the dojo with his gi on and decided to attack me. Okay, so that's an odd spot, right? But if he does that and I know it, or he's known to me, right? Or she's known to me, you go, yeah, man, this woman started throwing punches at me and I know she's got 5 professional fights and she could hurt me. You know, she's got fists and those fists will actually really do damage to me. If you knew that, then you can act on it, right?
Okay.
And as the martial artist, as somebody who goes, no, I do work on a high level of empty-handed skills, then I am accountable for those skills before a jury because you might ask, well, why didn't you? Well, no, of course your articulation is, well, they were a threat of deadly harm to me, and so I used my tools that were available. But at the same time, I think having that high level of skill gives me more options. So it makes it less likely that I have to escalate in order to protect myself. You know, in 14 years as a pastor, there were plenty of times when I had people that were kind of on the border, kind of edgy cases of people that might be a threat, and rather than feeling threatened and actually having to use force, I could be comfortable staying in there going, if this comes to force, I feel good about where I am and that I can probably handle myself and won't get hurt here. So that allowed me to be kind, that allowed me to be present, that allowed me to do some things that I can't. I think there's another aspect to this that maybe we want to think about a little bit, and that is there's been a lot of discussion about police use of chokes and whether or not those are reasonable. I'm a big fan of the idea that says a choke can be a very useful tool.
Okay.
And as a private citizen, when might that be the case? Well, I mean, again, what we want to first work on and focus on is getting up if we possibly can, right? So somebody knocks us over, we're in a ground fight, we'd like to recover our mobility. But sometimes we may not be able to do that, and I got to get this guy to stop wanting to fight me, and a choke might be the way to do that. And every person in jiu-jitsu is shown how to do an effective choke. They're shown, rear naked choke is a real easy one. That's very common. You get behind somebody, get an arm on them, put them to sleep, and they know how to do that in such a way that it doesn't cause any brain injury. You do, very brief, you shut off the blood flow, they go night-night. They're gonna be night-night for the next 20 or 30 seconds, then you can get them into a position where they can't hurt you no more. There's front chokes as well. You get cross-collar chokes. You can use, people's stuff against them, their clothing. I mean, if you have to fight the naked guy, you don't get that, but then you got bigger problems. Nobody wants to fight the naked guy. No. And so, those things are there. And but where I think we do start getting into some challenges for my friends who roll is when you're using joint locks, because the thing is, with a joint lock, you might say, oh, okay, well, great, I got this guy into side control and he wouldn't stop, and so maybe I got him in a Kimura or I got him in an Americano, which is an arm lock, right? Those of you who don't know, it's really a shoulder lock is what it is. And I went to this place, and normally what we do is we go to this place where it's painful and then they tap out, right? Then they go, oh, no more of that hurts. Yeah. Okay, and then we stop. But there's not taps on the street, right? You're like, nope, that's not how this works, buddy. But then the next step from there is to keep going, and that'll start breaking tendons and ligaments and muscles in their arm. Now we're talking about...
That is going to be deadly force.
So that now we've escalated...
At least, and maybe to explain that a little bit more, that's either going to be great bodily harm, serious bodily injury. It is going to change their life from that point forward, even if it doesn't kill them, and that actually is deadly force.
Right, so great bodily harm is what we're talking about here. Basically, again, what's the definition of great bodily harm? A serious disfigurement, a significant loss of the use of a limb, a hospitalization, inpatient hospitalization, and all those things. If I wreck somebody's shoulder, or if, God forbid, how some weirdness I got in a leg lock, anybody who's rolled at all, you can feel that leg lock is okay right up until it goes doink and your knee starts to go pop.
It's really bad.
And when your knee goes pop like that, it's really bad. It's really, really bad.
The old lady in me is cringing.
Yeah.
So bad.
Yeah. So it's a thing to be aware of. So my friends who roll and they're sport rollers, and I'm down, man. I'm more of a defensive roller myself, but I like the sport. I like what it does. I like what it gives me in terms of my physical fitness, in terms of my thinking and my ability to handle pressure, all those things. But you got to recognize that when you go, oh, okay, I'm going to put this lock on this guy here, or I'm going to do this bow and arrow choke or whatever. You start asking the question, okay, in a real world, am I okay to do this? Now, of course, in sport, why are we okay to do it? We've both slapped hands, bumped fists. We're in a mutual competition.
There, and that can.
I know what belt level he is. He knows what belt level, or she knows what belt level I am. We know we're in a competitive environment, so we're okay. On the street, we don't have that. We must act reasonably, right? And what reasonably might be is different for them and for me, and versus for somebody else. Because again, with that level of skill comes some responsibility with that skill. Now, that said, I do think having the skill is super valuable, because from a legal perspective, again, it gives me more options that I don't have to go to tool use.
Right.
That I don't have to, whack somebody over the head with a baseball bat, because I can put them to sleep if I need to.
Right.
Or if we get tussled up and it's a fist fight, I go, no, I can keep this a fist fight and probably be okay here. But I got to recognize as well, just like if a guy is throwing punches at me and I draw a gun and shoot him, I better have a darn good justification why I felt that I was at risk of death or great bodily harm.
Right.
Then if I go to that next step, and again, I'm not talking about just putting somebody to sleep. If I put somebody to sleep, he might feel like, oh, that guy will hurt me. I'm not going to do that. I'm a good, sane, sober, moral person, right? I'm going to put him night-night and then get him into a recovery position and get the threat over, okay? And actually, I kind of like even putting somebody to sleep, because if I punch somebody in the face, the chances are real good we're going to the hospital, right? I know how to use my hands or whatever. If I've got to go to elbows or something like that, somebody is going to get really badly hurt here. Whereas putting them night-night is much gentler, is the reality of things.
So would you almost say that, your average fist fight people, that's not going to be considered any level of deadly force, great bodily harm.
We're assuming somebody's not medically frail or those things.
Yeah, assuming all things being equal and there are mitigating factors, you're not going to see that fist fight be considered. And you're saying that chokes and that sort of thing, if you know what you're doing and you know how to put someone to sleep, that should be in that same category maybe as something to end a fight and a fight stopper, but that really wouldn't be considered serious bodily harm.
Well, now, so again, I think that you got to watch out because it depends on what state you live in, and it depends on what the jury's going to look at. What they've generally looked at with police uses of force now
that's been
from a federal level now. They're talking about it being considered punishment, which I think is very wrong. I think it just shows a real wrong-headedness about what the use of like a lateral vascular neck restraint, which is not a rear naked choke. It's its own thing. It's a different approach, but does a very similar thing. Cuts off blood flow momentarily to make a suspect lose consciousness, so then that way they can be restrained and they can be put in cuffs. Okay, fine. I think in a private citizen context, you can do that exact same thing, but you better have the training in order to do so, and you're going to face a pretty high level of scrutiny, I think, if you do that.
Right, so there's not a big margin for error there. I mean, and again, I don't have the training you do, but it's my understanding if you know what you're doing and it's going to work, it works fairly quickly, very effectively, and that is happening.
Yeah.
But if you're sitting there just messing around and trying to figure it out, or someone like me that doesn't know what you're doing, you maybe potentially could hurt someone, then it does become that.
Yeah, you could, for sure. I mean, somebody, if you know how to put a choke on somebody and send them night-night, they're going to sleep in 2-3 seconds, is what the reality is. Once you get that in there, they're going to lose consciousness maybe 4 or 5 seconds tops. When you get the carotid to stop, it goes, the lights go whoop out real quick.
If you're still struggling at 30 seconds, you have done something wrong and need to.
Yeah, you don't have it sunk in. I mean, you gotta change. It ain't working, friend, you know? And what you're not trying to do is you're not trying to cut somebody's wind off, right? So when we talk about a choke, really what we're trying to do is we're trying to cut off blood flow. We're not trying to cut off their wind.
Just long enough
for them to pass out. Just long enough for their brain to go, nope, got to reset the system.
And from a law enforcement standpoint, that's such a valuable tool and can potentially avoid having to shoot someone because you're able to subdue them so quickly and restrain them.
Yeah, for sure. But recognize that when you use that, whether that's a blood choke is what they call that, you know, so you've choked off the blood flow to the brain for a moment. Of course, as a good, sane, sober, moral person, you got to let it go as soon as they stop that. So the problem you see an MMA fight or something like that is as soon as the referee sees the person is out, they okay, let's stop, get off him, right? So we got to put him in a recovery position. So you as a good, sane, sober, moral, prudent person would do the same thing. Get off them, get the choke off, get them put out. Because when they keep holding it as a punishment, that's when things get wrong. And now you could face legal ramifications yourself.
And there's something I think so visceral, which is probably some of the PR problems that law enforcement has had with the scary chokes and these sort of things. I think it's really uncomfortable for people to even think about a choke as being a useful tool or something that could be a good thing, and especially use the terms like blood choke and stuff. That's going to immediately make people go, eee! So I think you'd have to be prepared to explain that. If you were with somebody that has that level of training, you need to be able to explain how it's a good tool, why it's a good tool, what you were trying to avoid, making this worse, having to shoot someone, having to do whatever. I used this tool because even though it was an escalation of what was happening, it actually de-escalated it. You can.
Right. I'm using less force.
Yeah, escalation can be a de-escalation.
I know people are going to ask the question too. They're going to ask this idea of, well, you don't know on the street if somebody has an underlying medical condition or any of those things. Well, you don't know that some of that stuff in competition either, quite frankly. Right. You don't got to go through, this big medical event in order to go and enroll in a jiu-jitsu competition. And I get it, right? So you go, well, wait a minute, what's the idea here? Is that you want this other person to stop fighting you. You'd only ever use that against somebody that was a threat to you and yours, who wouldn't stop fighting you. And your first goal is to get away from them, right? So as a private citizen, you want to break contact. But if for some reason you're stuck in that contact, then you want the fight to stop. And I think as a good person, you'd want that fight to stop with the minimum amount of force that you can use and with the minimum amount of damage.
And as quickly as you probably can do it.
Yeah.
The longer you're rolling around, the longer you're scraping across cement, the longer you're in traffic or whatever it is, the higher the chance that something goes really wrong and somebody gets really hurt.
And so I really think as a good, sane, sober, moral, prudent person, you're probably not thinking about submissions in your jiu-jitsu game on the street. You're thinking about control. You're thinking about getting up, getting yourself to a more advantageous position where they're not on top of you, getting a sweep so then that way you can be on top, getting yourself to a place where you can disengage from them and be gone, and getting to a place where you can get out of there. If you certainly can't, now we're looking to a place of great control where they can't hurt me, I can't hurt them. If they just won't, might something like a choke be a tool that you have to use? Yeah, but recognize that it's gonna be a thing that they're gonna look at real close.
You're going to have a lot of explaining to do, and I think it's really fascinating. I'm not sure that that's something that would have immediately occurred to me without some thought, that some of the pressures on the different joints would be considered deadly force, especially if you were aware that there comes a moment when it's not going to be okay anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you tweak somebody's shoulder so bad that it rips all their shoulder out. Now, if a guy's got a knife in his hand and like,
Yeah,
I've got this lock,
then
and you
of
go,
course.
dude, let that knife go, let it drop the knife, drop the knife, and he won't drop the knife. Okay, man, I'm gonna break this shoulder so you can't use that knife against me. And why?
That's exactly when deadly force is justified.
Deadly force is justified because I'm wrapped up with this guy and he won't let that knife go.
You just have to understand that even though it's just a shoulder and you're just tearing a few things, it still is deadly force.
Yeah, that's a great bodily harm that's coming. So I think the big thing, the use of force laws are the same no matter what.
They really are. I think there might be more explanation that you may have to make. You may be able to have to explain your actions a little bit more, because it's not a big body of experience that most people are going to have. So to be able to have that training and ability, do you think you're held to a higher standard? Like you might have to use your body to stop something, rather than, like, people would expect, you're a martial artist, you can just stop that with your hands, rather than, do you think there's more of a perceived responsibility?
You know, I think they see this sometimes in law enforcement use of forces, and people go, well, it's just a knife. Why didn't they just run in there and take it away from her? And I go, I've been studying martial arts for 15 years. I'm not running in there and stopping somebody with a knife. That's ridiculous. I'm going to get cut to freaking ribbons.
Right.
And my training actually teaches me that. You know,
Right.
when you go pressure test somebody that's got a real life knife and they want to cut you up, friend, you're going to get cut up.
Yeah.
And I'm not stepping in there unless I absolutely have to. And then I'm expecting I'm going to be leaky at the end of this, but I got to, and so I'm going to do what I can and do that. Might you be held to a higher standard? Yeah, but hopefully, you know, you have some experts who can come in and go, yeah, that's ridiculous, and we just can't do that, and that's just not how things go. If I had 9 people around, if I'm a law enforcement officer and I got 9 cops, yeah, somebody should get the taser out for sure, right? And see if we can do that. But when they charge me with the knife, now it's a different story.
Yeah.
I've lost my discretionary time. I got to act right now to save my life. Or if I got 9 cops with shields and we can, you know, form a perimeter and testudo, you know what I mean? And just like you get on the ground, okay, I get it, right?
You have a lot more options when you're with a group, and have a lot more tools, but not as much when you're by yourself. But so you're saying it's basically the same. You have to be able to understand when it is and when it's not deadly force, and you have to be able to articulate that. Even at a higher level of skill and practice and knowledge, you might have to articulate even more to explain that at a deeper level to the jury so they understand your actions.
Yep. But remember, the benefit of the martial arts, the benefit of your actual skill set, is that you're able to successfully not get hurt and successfully repel somebody who is doing you harm. And that is the value right there. And having that skill set, even if it might expose you to, well, you didn't get to use your gun as early, I think is super valuable.
Well, and I love how you, as a pastor in a previous life and as a Christian now, use that as a way to maybe get in a little bit closer to people, to potentially take on a little bit more risk, because you can handle a little bit more risk to help people, whereas that's not something I'm able to do.
Let me say it this way. When you have a higher level of skill set, it's not that you can accept more risk, it's that fewer things are an
You
actual
can
risk.
handle more risk.
Well, no, not even you can handle more risk. It's not a risk to me.
It's not a risk. That's the better
I'm
way
not
to
at
say it.
risk because my skill set is so high that the risk to me is much lower than somebody without that. So we have the same level of risk tolerance. It's just when does that risk accrue comes a lot later.
Very interesting. That's a really good way to put it.
Hope it helps you guys. Listen, go to your martial arts training, right? Come roll with me in jiu-jitsu. I'd love it when people choke me out. It's great. It's fun.
It sounds really weird. Like,
Everybody who says that. Let's put on PJs and simulate murdering each other. Have a great day, guys.